Guten Tag, APUSH. We have a new video today. It's the bee's knees by the big cheese himself, Mr. Lininger. Let's make history today as we jaw over our period 4, which is the Unit 3 review video. But first, let's do our daily punishment. Want to hear a pizza joke? Never mind, it's too cheesy. Let's get started. Period 4 starts in 1800 and goes to 1848. The test structure of this unit is 10 to 17% of the exam, just like last unit. Essay topics could include reform movements inspired by the Second Great Awakening, westward expansion, impact of slavery, the whole market revolution and the economic developments. Why was 1800 to 1848 chosen as dates for this unit? 1800 is Jefferson's election. 1848 ends with Seneca Falls Convention and the women's rights movement. So this really ends with where we stop talking about the reform movements of the mid-19th century. This time period focuses on the market revolution, the whole economic development in America in the mid-1800s, the increase in democracy, Jacksonian democracy, several reform movements inspired by the Second Great Awakening. So in 1800, with the election of Jefferson, we have two political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. These are the first political parties. They were formed in responses to Hamilton's financial plan and the French Revolution. There's my boy, A.H. The Federalists tended to be upper class. They advocated a loose interpretation of the Constitution. They were pro-British. They favored merchants. They liked the national bank. The Democratic Republicans tended to be commoners, middle class. They advocated a strict interpretation of the Constitution, although they were kind of hypocrites sometimes, although everybody is if you're a politician. After the Louisiana Purchase, they'll kind of forget that. They were pro-French. They favored farmers. They disliked the national bank, although they will kind of support it later on once they realize they need it. The other big political parties we have is towards the end of the unit. This is where we get the Democrats and the Whigs. This is the second party system. The Whigs were formed in response to King Andrew I, Andrew Jackson. The Whigs were just everybody that disliked Andrew Jackson for the most part. The Democrats tended to be the party of the common man. They favored universal suffrage, white male suffrage, the spoil system. They wanted lower tariffs. They wanted to expand slavery. There's Henry Clay! He's here again! The Whigs tended to favor tariffs, a strong Congress, a bus, and internal improvements. Remember, tariffs, bus, internal improvements is called the American system, created by this man right here. There he is, Henry Clay. You really get the whole idea of manifest destiny. Really, it's been around ever since the beginning of America. But you're going to start to see continental manifest destiny with the Louisiana Purchase. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson is going to buy the Louisiana Purchase from France. He kind of against some of his ideals because he didn't think he had the constitutional power to buy it. But he's going to be pragmatic and buy it anyway. This will double the size of the United States. Jefferson here will switch from strict constructionism to loose interpretation of the Constitution. We're going to have increase in democracy and governmental relationships. The Supreme Court is going to increase the power of the federal government over states. This is the Marshall Court. We get Marbury v. Madison, which gives the idea of judicial review. McCulloch v. Maryland was the one under John Marshall that said that the national bank was constitutional. We have Gibbons v. Ogden, which allowed the national government to have control over interstate commerce. Dartmouth College v. Woodward says a state cannot get rid of a private institution. A contract is a contract, even if the contract was made with the King of England. So these court cases are going to increase the power of the federal government over the states. They're going to protect private contracts. They're going to protect the sanctity of private contracts. We're going to have a growth of a market economy, which will increase debates over the role of government during this time. Some people will want internal improvements. Some people will want tariffs. Some people will want a national bank. Often people are going to be more loyal to their region, not the nation. There will be crises during this time. So, for example, the Embargo Act of 1807, where the British were doing impressment, and Jefferson stops trading with all the countries. That's going to lead to smuggling. That's an example of regionalism. The nullification crisis, where South Carolina tries to get rid of a tariff and it almost leads to the Civil War. That's another example of regionalism. The South will identify and take pride in slavery. People like John C. Calhoun argued that slavery was a positive good. So America is going to increase its presence in the Western Hemisphere. Let's talk about that. After the Louisiana Purchase, America will participate in several initiatives in the Western Hemisphere and Asia. Under Polk, which we'll talk about next unit as well, they will negotiate the Oregon border. He promised to go to war with Britain, but he will negotiate at the 49th parallel. Whoop. Texas will be annexed in 1845. This will help lead to the Mexican-American War because there was a debate over whether the border was the Nueces or the Rio Grande. There will be tension over slavery here. Another example is the Monroe Doctrine. This was when James Monroe was president. This is where his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, laid a message. They were upset that Russia was trying to get involved in North America, and they were kind of looking into Canada and stuff and Alaska. And this was a message that said that Europe to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. America will stay out of the European affairs, but Europe needs to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. The Western Hemisphere is no longer can be used for colonization. The Monroe Doctrine is an important document, not because the countries will follow it, because America does not have power to enforce it at this time, but it is going to be a document we're going to use later on when America becomes a little bit more OP. Let's talk about some of the effects of expansionism. There's going to be debates about new territories. Are they going to be slave or non-slave? Usually they would switch from one to the other. There's going to be resistance to the increasing power of the federal government. So, for example, when Jefferson was president, after Jefferson was president during the War of 1812, a lot of the Federalists opposed the War of 1812 because it was war against Britain and it was hurting them economically. So the Federalists met in Hartford, Connecticut. They did the Hartford Convention where some of the people urged secession, some of them urged nullification. This will not be successful. At the same time this was happening, the Americans won the Battle of New Orleans, so it made the Federalists look at like traitors. And this is going to actually lead to the end of the Federalist Party. But this is showing that there is this whole idea of regionalism and disloyalty during this time. Another issue was the nullification crisis. This is where South Carolina was salty about the tariff of abominations. Andrew Jackson passed a new tariff, the tariff of 1832. South Carolina didn't think it went far enough. They're going to nullify it. Jackson, even though he was a Democrat, was upset. He said the state does not have power to nullify a federal law. He threatens to go to war with South Carolina. In the last second, Henry Clay makes a compromise, the compromise tariff of 1833, which is going to prevent a civil war, and it lowers the tariff. There's the vampire, John C. Calhoun. Those living on the frontier are going to often advocate for westward expansion. They were known as war hawks. There will be conflict with the Native Americans, like we have Tecumseh, Battle of Tippecanoe. A lot of the Native Americans fought on the British side during the War of 1812. When Andrew Jackson was president, Congress will pass the Indian Removal Act. Even though the Supreme Court is going to try to stop this from happening in Worcester v. Georgia, Andrew Jackson is going to ignore the Supreme Court because he's a horrible human being. And he's going to force the Native Americans to leave. This will lead to the Trail of Tears. There's the Trail of Tears. We will have a big issue of expansionism and slavery. One of the big crises that happened was the Missouri Crisis, which is going to lead to the Missouri Compromise, also known as the Compromise of 1820. So what happened was there was a congressman named Talmadge that tried to pass a law that would have said that the slaves in Missouri would get gradual emancipation. This made the Southerners upset, so they demand that Missouri becomes a slave state. The North does not want Missouri to become a slave state because then there would be more slave states than free states. So Henry Clay, the great compromiser, is going to create a three-part compromise. He's going to say above 3630, there'll be no slavery anymore. Missouri will become a free state. Excuse me, Mm, mm. Ah, how did that happen? I guess it got fixed. Anyways, my bad. Missouri is going to become a slave state. Maine, which is ME, will be a free state. And no slavery north of the 3630 parallel. This preserves a balance at 12 states each. Here's the Missouri Compromise. Missouri right here, MO, slave state. Maine, ME, free state. No slavery north of the 3630, which is this line right here, I believe. Yeah. This compromise will be broken down later on. It's going to be overturned by the Kansas-Nebraska Act because both Kansas and Nebraska are going to be north of the 3630. Eventually, the Dred Scott decision in one of our next units will say that slavery can exist anywhere. What's going to happen is a lot of Southerners will cultivate the land in the Southeast, and this is going to lead to a lot of Southerners want to move west and to bring slavery westward. And this is going to cause tension with the expansion of slavery. The Second Great Awakening is going to stress the importance of achieving perfection, having an individual conversion, being born again, and then using your faith to try to help fix the problems that are in America. It's going to inspire many reform movements, abolitionism, women's rights, like the Seneca Falls Convention, temperance. In the South, African Americans, both free and slave, will have a lot of restrictions on their citizenships and their rights. There will be some emancipation plans. The American Colonization Society was formed during this time. Eventually, we're going to have other anti-slavery groups like the American Anti-Slavery Society. We have the Quakers, which was the first anti-slavery group. There will be resistance to democracy. It includes pro-slavery arguments. Slavery is a positive good. Xenophobia. A lot of people are dislike. This is the time period when we have the old immigrants coming to America. Old immigrants are immigrants from North and Western Europe, mostly Ireland and Germany. And there's going to be some xenophobia. People that dislike the immigrants, like the Know Nothing Party. They discriminated against the Irish. There's going to be anti-black sentiments. There's like racial stereotypes, minstrel shows. Restrictive anti-Indian policies like the Indian Removal Act, the 12 Tiers. These are all examples of going against democracy. Let's talk about some of the more things that come from the Second Great Awakening, new cultures. We have new art, architecture, and literature emerged. We have the Hudson River Valley art. We have new authors like Edgar Allan Poe. Hudson River Valley art did landscape paintings in America. John James Audubon did the environment and birds. We have religious groups that were sometimes led or supported by women. The Shakers, Mother Ann Lee, they believed in sexual equality, celibacy. They shook for the Lord. The Mormons is a new religion that was going to be created by Joseph Smith. He's eventually going to be martyred in Illinois. Brigham Young will take over, and he'll move to Utah. Mormons were disliked by a lot of Americans because they did practice polygamy. Also, they had a whole new Bible that Joseph Smith discovered, the Book of Mormon. The Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, this is where they issued the Declaration of Sentiments. This document was supposed to be based on the Declaration of Independence. It's where women are declaring independence and they want immediate political equality. It's going to be led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Here are some of the ways that free and enslaved blacks will respond to their conditions. You'll have new family structures like surrogate families. Some African Americans like Frederick Douglass, right here, who is an escaped slave, are going to be involved in the abolitionist movement. Harriet Tubman leads the Underground Railroad. David Walker wrote a pamphlet called The Appeal to the Colored People, Citizens of the World, where he told them to rise up and kill the white slave owners, resist racial oppression. We do have slave rebellions during this time. We have like Denmark Vesey. We have Gabriel Prosser. The most famous slave rebellion that scares the South the most is the Nat Turner Rebellion in Virginia. It will not be successful, but it is going to scare a lot of the Southerners. You're going to see that a lot of Southern states do more and more harsh black codes, like making it illegal to teach slaves to read and becoming more and more paranoid that the North is supporting abolitionism. Let's talk about some of the economic developments during this time. We have new textile machinery like the spinning jenny, which is going to turn cotton into fabric. We have the steam engines, which was from James Watts. It's going to allow boats to go against the current. We have interchangeable parts, which was created by Eli Whitney. This will lead for mass production. We have new canals, so new forms of transportation. Remember, this is the time period of the transportation revolution. We have canals, turnpikes, steamer ships, steamboats, clipper ships, railroads, especially in the 1840s, is going to lead to faster shipment of goods and people. The telegraph, Morse code, will spread information more quickly. We have new agricultural inventions during this time. The steel plow, the McCormick's reaper. What's going to happen during this time is really America is going to have like a continental economy. In the north, they are industrializing with like textile factories in the early 1800s. In the south, they're growing tobacco. And in the west, like so west of the Appalachian Mountains, they are the new breadbasket of America, like corn, hogs, pork, animals. So those are the new like regional economies. One of the big economic systems proposed in this time was the American system by my boy Henry Clay. There he is, right here. He sought to unify the national economy. They wanted a national bank, a second bus. They wanted a protective tariff. The protective tariff would encourage people to buy from the American businesses by making foreign businesses more expensive. This was to help the American industry. They also wanted like internal improvements, like roads that will connect different states and stuff to help the national economy. This will help the North and the Midwest more than the South. So the North and the Midwest will sometimes support the American system, where the South will not. We do have settlers and migrants from Europe. The Irish will settle in cities. The Germans will often go to the West as farmers. They'll settle in the East Coast, like eastern cities like New York, Boston, and the Midwest. This is going to lead to a more interdependence of the Northeast and Northwest. Also, it's going to lead to some xenophobia and dislike of the old immigrants. This whole time period is called the Market Revolution. This is when you have a transformation in how goods were produced. More people are working outside the home. It's going to be an increase in technology and transportation as well with the Transportation Revolution. We're going to have an increase in national banks, tariffs, and internal improvements. That's the American system. These are going to be some of the major political issues. Some regional groups will support some, and some will support the others. A lot of times, regional interest will trump national concerns. If you're a Southerner, you're going to oppose the national bank because it does not help the South, or you perceive it does not help the South. Let's talk about how the market revolution impacted America. The South will remain distinctly different from the other regions. It relied on cotton exportation to make money. The market revolution will change life in the following ways. It's going to increase the gap between the rich and the poor. There will be a middle class emerging, especially in like the industrialized area in the North. Remember, we have the North, the West, and the South. You'll have the separation between home and workplace. More goods are going to be produced outside of the home with like the birth of like factories, textile factories and stuff. It will help change gender and family roles. You do have some women working in textile factories like the Lowell girls, which we talked about before. For many Americans, regional interests were more important than national concerns, as seen through slavery, we talked about this, the national bank, and tariffs. The tariffs will favor the North because it forces people to buy from the national factories. And if you're a consumer, which the Southerners are consumers, they don't actually make the stuff. They don't have manufacturing in the South. They dislike it because it makes goods more expensive for them. And internal improvements. Tariffs would pay the cost of internal improvements. It was favored out in the West. Henry Clay was from Kentucky, but he supports a lot of these stuff because internal improvements, a national bank, and tariffs do help out the West. For some reason, a lot of the Southerners did not like internal improvements. They thought they were unconstitutional, but they could have benefited from it. Here's some of the key people you should know from this unit, kiddos. We have John Marshall. He was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. His decisions will strengthen the power of the federal government over the states. Marbury v. Madison, Gibbons v. Ogden, McCulloch v. Maryland. Henry Clay! He did the American system. Leader of the Whigs. He did the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise Tariff of 1833 and the Compromise of 1850 later on, the Great Compromiser. Andrew Jackson. Leader of the Democrats. He'll do Jacksonian democracy, elimination of property requirements. All white male adults can vote. Eli Whitney. He invented the cotton gin and interchangeable parts. John C. Calhoun. He was a senator from South Carolina, one of the great triumvirate. He supported nullification and Southern rights. He said slavery was a positive good. The Know Nothing Party was a political party that was anti-old immigrant. They sought to limit immigrants' political power and influence and kind of like limit the amount of immigrants that could come to America. At this time, anti-immigrant feeling's not going to be as powerful as it is when we get to the next couple units, when the new immigrants come, but there is still a lot of discrimination against the old immigrants. Let's talk about some of the abolitionists. We have Denmark Vesey. He led a slave revolt in South Carolina. Nat Turner led a slave revolt in Virginia in 1831. Frederick Douglass was a former slave, a great orator. He supported women's rights. He's one of the big abolitionists in the American Anti-Slavery Society. William Lloyd Garrison was the creator of the newspaper The Liberator. He was a radical. He wanted to end slavery immediately. Immediate and uncompensated end to slavery. Douglass was a little bit more moderate than him. He wanted to try to end slavery politically through elections. John Brown is going to be one of the people that goes to Kansas, which we'll talk about next unit. John Brown's going to attack Southerners and attack slave owners in Kansas, and he eventually does the raid in Harper's Ferry. Harriet Tubman leads the Underground Railroad. In the reform movement, we have Dorothea Dix. She wanted to reform the mental asylums and the prisons. Horace Mann was the father of public education. Elizabeth Cady Stanton is one of the big people for women's rights. She did the Seneca Falls Convention and the Declaration of Sentiments. Charles G. Finney is probably the most important person to know from the preachers of the Second Great Awakening. And Brigham Young is going to help create he's going to help move the Mormons out west to Utah. Joseph Smith creates the Mormon Church. Brigham Young will become the leader after Joseph Smith is killed in Illinois. All right, kiddos. That's all I have for today. Until next time, deuces. Deuces, yeah.